Amen. Okay, if you're looking at chapter 15, I'm just going to go left one page and see, I got a couple highlights here. Absalom killed his brother and had to leave. And he was there 3 years. That's in chapter 13 and verse 38. And then in chapter 14 and verse 28, David finally lets him come home, but he has to stay away. He says, you can come back, but you can't come into my presence. So he's forgiven, but not forgiven, which that didn't work out very well. And then he finally gets to come back. And in chapter 15, the story is that Absalom starts to be a pot stirrer. And he's slowly, secretly gaining support for himself and turning support against his dad, David. And this goes on in chapter 15 and verse 7 for 4 years. And so this is where we left off. This is point number 1. I showed you this chart last time, but I wanted to at least have a second to talk about it. Remember, this is the list. Everything's governed by this. God said this is what's going to happen to you because of your sin. I'm going to move through this since we've already explained it, but Bathsheba's sin with Uriah, the baby was born, the baby died. So we're just going to start there and say 1 year since the sin. I assume, I don't know what that number really is. Anyway, so right down here, the time when Absalom finally rises up against his dad and David has to run for his life. It's been 12 years since his sin with Bathsheba. And I asked you to think about this. This is where I think this is where you really start to feel, when you look at the timeline, you really start to feel like that thing about how sin is going to cost you way more than you ever intended to pay. Don't you know? I mean, think about it like this. I asked you where you were in life 12 years ago. Think about it. Olivia wasn't even born yet, right? Like there was no Olivia in the world 12 years ago. And when you put a timeline, like a perspective on it like that, and you say, what sin did I commit before Olivia was born that has been torturing me and haunting me and following me for her entire life? That's what David's doing right now. The torture and the haunting and the following, like it's involved the death of a couple kids. One kid was raped. I mean, just crazy stuff. That's the thing. It's going to cost you way more than you ever intended to pay. Do you have anything to say about that? I thought that I would just open it up for that because when I saw the timeline, I've always read through this and I've always said, okay, David had to suffer as a result of his sin with Bathsheba. But when I put the timeline down on paper and I was like, wow, that's got to be like the 12 longest years of anybody's life. Yeah. I mean, that's the closest I can come to thinking about anything like this is for a long time, like several years. Our life was controlled and determined by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Kansas City. You can live here within 32 counties. And it's like, I felt like I'm being driven and controlled by something outside of myself. And that's what it is. It's like a prison. Anything else you want to say about that? And this is the point. I don't want to just notice it for the sake of noticing it. This is the thing that really helps me. Like this class, I'm not just trying to beat the drum over and over again. This class is really good for me. Because when I think about this story, don't you know that every single day of David's life, he thought to himself, I sure wish I hadn't done that. And that's our takeaway. It's not worth it. That's our big takeaway. It's just not worth it. And just so you know, In case you happen to be wondering about this, my sermon on Sunday morning is going to be the forgiveness that we get through Jesus. Because we've been just beating the tar out of David, and repercussions and consequences. And I know you got to be thinking, well, what's the point of it all then? Well, just know that it's coming. Like, we'll talk about real, total, ultimate forgiveness. That's on the horizon, so it's coming.
Not sure how.
Yeah, I want to do something with you real quick. We've got Absalom here. So we talk about David suffering the consequences of his sin for all these 12 years. Starting here at, let's call that year 2, that's a long time for Absalom to let his bitterness soak. 11 years of just living in anger, and it grows and it grows and it grows and it grows. And so I want to switch gears for 1 second. Even though this is a David class, I'm going to ask for 3 readers, just so we can move through this a little quicker than maybe I'm inclined to do. The first one, Ephesians 4. Who's going to read Ephesians 4? Jesse, Ephesians 4. Adam, Hebrews 12. James 3. Who wants James 3? Brennan, James 3. Okay. So, Jesse, Ephesians 4, 31 and 32. This great balance between bitterness and wrath and anger, contrasted with kindness and forgiveness, and the same forgiveness that we have received, we offer to other people. Absalom swam in the bitterness and wrath and anger pool for 11 years. And you see where it turns out. Adam, Hebrews 12, 14, and 15, please. I like that one because it talks about the root of bitterness. The root that eventually, with the imagery, it grows into a tree. And then, Brennan, James 3, 13 to 18. Forward stuff. Not except for, but especially on that passage, this thing that we're talking about, James calls it demonic. That's pretty picturesque, like, this is how demons behave. This is how demons want you to behave. And so, I think it's worth at least looking at Absalom here and thinking about swimming in this pool for 11 years and at least having another takeaway for this class. If you're hanging on to something, you got to let it go for your own sake. I mean, partly because it's a matter of morality and what God said in some of these passages, but you've got the story of Cain and Abel and Absalom and so many other examples of this. And, if this is your one takeaway from the whole class, I think it would be a good one. Rob's thing. If you got that root of bitterness just living inside of you, it's not going to just stay there and stay the same. It's either going to go away or it's going to get bigger. You got to get rid of it. And this is one of those, trust me, I know from experience things. Like, you just got to get rid of it. You can't hang on to stuff. What else? Anything you want to say about bitterness? Or Jesse, you got one? Ryan? I always think of it like this, and you can criticize me. Let's not talk about this right now. I'm just going to drop the word bomb and move on. I think of a church family like an investment. You pour into it and pour into it and pour into it and pour into it. And when the day comes that I need that, I've invested in. Like, I know you. You know me. We're there. And you're ready to correct me. It just takes time. Love, family, time, all of this stuff. I'm going to push forward. Not because I don't like the conversation, but because I got a super long list. We're going to go to the bottom of the screen tonight. 2 Samuel 15 and verse 16 through 18. So the king went out. David's running. This is the spot where he runs. The king went out, and all his household after him. And the king left 10 concubines to keep the house. And the king went out, and all the people after him, and they halted at the last house. And all his servants passed by him, and all the Cherethites and the Pelethites, and all 600 Gittites who had followed him from Gath passed on before the king. I put myself in the shoes. This is what I think of. Here's David, and there's at least 600 of them. There's more than 600 of them. Here's David and these people. This is the moment where they run, and they stop at the last house, and David posts up, and everybody passes him. And every single person that passes him, I don't imagine he did this, but I can imagine David saying, I'm sorry I did this to you. I'm sorry I did this to you. I'm sorry I did this to you. This is my fault. I'm sorry about this. All of these people, it's on him. We know from the text this is happening because of the choice that David made. I don't want to carry that. And then here are some really neat words. 2 Samuel 15 and verses 24 through 26. Wait a second. This is this one. So Zadok is the high priest, and he's, okay, David, we're going to run from it. So he grabs the ark. He says, let's go with the ark. 24. Abiathar came up, and behold, Zadok came also with him, the Levites, bearing the ark of the covenant of God. And they set, where am I? I lost my spot. And they set down the ark of God until the people had all passed out of the city. Then the king said to Zadok, carry the ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and let me see both it and his dwelling place. But if he says, I have no pleasure in you, behold, here I am, let him do to me what seems good to him. I think there's some good stuff that we can see in David in this story too. This is a really good attitude. This is like David 12 years down the road. You know what you can also read is Psalm 3. Psalm 3 is David running from Absalom. And in spite of all of the bad that we have said about David up to this point, bad choices, sinful decisions, he still is relying and leaning on God in his misery. And I like this. Take the ark back. I love the attitude. If it's God's will that I come back, then I come back. But if not, then so be it. Here I am. I think that's a good attitude. I like it. It's I feel sad for David to think such a thing, but I think it's a great attitude. This is where we are. Got to do what we got to do. God's will be done. You can interrupt me. I'm going to keep pressing forward, and I'll look up every once in a while, but I want to press forward here. Chapter 15 and verse 30. I only include this verse because of the picture of great suffering. And also, David went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. You know anybody else who went up the Mount of Olives in a miserable, horrible situation? If we were doing a sermon, probably there's some really neat connection with Jesus that we could do right there. But he's barefoot, with his head is covered, and all the people who were with him covered their heads, and they all went up weeping as they went. All of this is a result of sin. In chapter 15 and verse 31, and it was told David, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. Remember, Ahithophel is Bathsheba's grandpa. I'm sorry, I shouldn't get fanciful with the Bible, but I imagine it like this. Somebody comes up to David and says, oh no, David, your most trusted advisor, Ahithophel, he's turned on you and he's with Absalom. And David goes, I wonder when that was going to happen. I had that one coming too. I mean, he has nobody to blame. David is the one to blame for this. In chapter 16 and verse 5, I'm going to read 5 through 11. I'm getting behind. Chapter 16 and verse 5. I'm going to tell you this. Let's slow down and emphasize verse 11. But we got to read 5 through 11 to get to the point. But verse 11 is why I'm here. When King David came to Barum, there came out a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. And as he came, he cursed continually. And he threw stones at David and at all the servants of King David, and all the people and all the mighty men were on his right hand and his left. I'm imagining this situation. And if I'm David, I bet the words hurt a lot more than the rocks. And what he's saying, 7, Shimei said as he cursed, get out, you man of blood, you worthless man. The Lord has avenged on you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned, and the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. See, your evil is on you, for you are a man of blood. I'd rather get hit by the rocks than hit by those words if I'm David. 9, then Abishai the son of Zeruiah said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and take off his head. But the king said, what do I have to do with you, you son of Zeruiah? If he is cursing because the Lord said to him, curse David, who then shall say, why have you done so? Verse 11, this is why I'm here. And David said to Abishai and to all his servants, behold, my own son seeks my life. How much more now this Benjaminite? Leave him alone and let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. That sounds as much like a confession and acceptance as anything else in this whole story. No, don't go and kill him for saying those things and throwing rocks. I deserve every bit of what's coming right now. Comments? I'll come up for air for just a minute. Yeah, I like that you say that, because here's the reason why. If I'm David in this situation, I'm probably going to want to correct him. That's not true. No. David goes, leave him alone. I mean, I think we're getting a window into his soul here, and he's broken at this point. He knows. It took 12 years to get here. Let's see, where are we? This one, we knew this one was coming. Here's the passage, chapter 12 and verses 11 and 12. Do you remember when God said to David, you did this thing privately, but I'm going to do it in front of everybody for all the world to see. Here it is. Chapter 16 and verses 21 and 22. Where am I here? Ahithophel said to Absalom, go into your father's concubines, whom he has left to keep the house, and all Israel will hear that you have made yourself a stench to your father, and the hands of all who are with you will be strengthened. That's not the end of it. It's not just do this thing and everybody will hear about it. 22. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof. Remember what the curse was? In the sight of all the sun. You did it secretly. I'm going to do this thing to you and expose it to the world. And Absalom went into his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. If you mark things like that in your Bible, that would be a really good thing to mark. Just so you can say, just mark the thing. God said it would happen. It happened in this verse. And when you get to this verse, say, God said it would happen back in this verse. It's good to have those reminders. Unless you just want to read 4 chapters at a time every time you want to look for something. Anything there? Yes, Cindy?
Well, the person that's giving him this idea,
What's that?
the person that's giving him this idea, isn't that Bathsheba's grandma?
Yeah, Ahithophel. So David's army fights. I know that not probably, that's ridiculous. Definitely the most painful, saddest text in all the scripture has to do with Jesus suffering and dying on the cross. This is only my opinion. This is easily number 2. David's army is out fighting against Absalom's army, and David says on the way out, hey, I know that Absalom is the main bad guy here, but if you happen to come across him, please don't kill him. He's my son. I'm kind of like where Stacy was in this. Like, is that the right thing to do? Is that the wrong thing to do? I mean, these are hard. I can definitely understand it. Please don't slaughter my kid. But Joab, our friend Joab, and we'll have to figure out maybe in another class if you think Joab is a good guy or a bad guy, but Joab says, I don't care what David said, takes a spear and rams him through, kills Absalom. Word comes back to David, and here is, I think, probably the second most horrible passage in the Bible. In verse 33, chapter 18, and verse 33, and the king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he wept, he said, "O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son." It doesn't do it justice to read it like that. You can hear a dad crying over his boy probably. And I think that David is not crying because his son has been killed. I think that David is crying because he knows it's his fault. This is number 3. Remember, David was going to pay fourfold. We got 3 dead kids now. The baby with Bathsheba, Amnon, and now Absalom. Anything you want to say there? I'll move through this pretty quick. I definitely don't want to read it. But, man, what a powerful... This, to me, is such a powerful statement about the cost that you have to pay with sin, or that you may have to pay, that David had to pay with sin. And I'm not entirely sure how to articulate this, but starting in chapter 19 and verse 11, King David sent the message to Zadok and Abiathar the priests, "Say to the elders of Judah, why should you be the last to bring the king back to his house when the word of all Israel has come to the king? You are my brothers, you are my bone and my flesh. Why then should be the last to bring the king?" And say to Amasa, "Are you not my bone and my flesh?" And he's persuading Judah to take him back as king. And here's the thing that I want to look at with each of these last 4 sections. We've already gone through this. He already has persuaded Judah. He became the king of Judah for 7 years before Israel. And the reason why I'm here is because this story is David starting all over again. Like everything that he's accomplished in his life, he drew the wrong card in the board game. He went all the way back to the start, and now he has to start from scratch at the very beginning. And then in chapter 20, in verse 1, he has to win Israel again. Now there happened to be there a worthless man whose name was Sheba, the son of Birki, the Benjaminite. Saul was a Benjaminite. So we're going to fight against Israel against someone from the family of Saul. And he blew a trumpet and he said, "We have no portion in David, and we have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man who is 10, so Israel." So all the men of Israel withdrew from David and followed Sheba. And David wins back Israel in this chapter. That's what chapter 20 is all about. It's like, we've already done this. Like, you want to just go backwards in your life and do all the hard stuff again? You don't want to have to fight the same fights? In chapter 21, now there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year, and David sought the face of the Lord, and the Lord said, "There is blood guilt on Saul and on his house, because he put the Gibeonites to death." Now we're going to go all the way back, and we're going to deal with Saul's mess again. How far down the road? I don't know how far down the road we are at this point, since David's been king. we've already done this. And then, this is the one that pointed it out to me, that made me think, oh, hey, chapter 21 and verse 15, there was war again between the Philistines and Israel. So, remember that David had conquered the Philistines, and God said, this is part of his promise, I'll give you rest from all your enemies. That was taken away. Now he's back to fighting the Philistines. And look at verse 16. I'm not going to try and say the name, but he's one of the descendants of the giant whose spear weighed 300 shekels and who was armed with a new sword, thought to kill David. Does that sound familiar to anyone? At the very end of David's story, he's doing the exact same thing that he did at the very beginning of his story. And I think it's on purpose. Everything he fought for, everything he accomplished was wiped clean because of his sin. And he had to go back and do it all over again. I think we're 4 classes into this. We did intro on the sin, and this is our 3rd repercussions class. Maybe intro and repercussions was the same class. It's 2 subheadings on my notes. That's it for me. Like, that's the reason why I'm here, and that's what I'm taking away from this. Holy moly, however much that sin seems appealing right now in the moment, not worth it. No way. Knowing where this stuff ends up, no way. That's my big takeaway. I don't want any part of it. I don't even want one of those things. You just have one of those things. That's enough for me. Put a whole board on there. And then, this is the last thing I have to say. You can have the last word after this. All of that is not even the worst part of sin. Separation from God and eternal hell. So, the sin thing will keep you longer than you want to stay, will take you farther than you want to go in this class, will cost you way more than you ever intended to pay. I think it would be useful. You know, you talk about a parable. There's no way in the world I would do this, but you know what would be really useful, I think, would be for me to say, let me tell you about a guy I know. We can't do that, but you want to know, watch this. This just strikes me real quick. I don't know if I'll be able to figure out which button does this. Let's leave on a positive note. You want to know, like right about now is where we could start to feel the amazing thing that Jesus did for us. You look at that board, and it's like, let's see if this works. Gone. Imagine if you're David and you get to hear about Jesus and Jesus says, wipe your slate clean. We'll talk about that on Sunday morning. Thank you all for your comments tonight. I appreciate the participation.